Well, good morning, everyone. Maybe we can just catch the door there, if you would, and then, not that there's anything secret, it just helps the acoustics. So while he's doing that. Anyway, good morning, everyone. Bonjour, and happy summer. And I think hopefully January, our spate of January may be over because it's now officially summer. So. Je m'appelle Colin Smith, and it's my honor to chair this morning's panel on infrastructure project management. We will hear momentarily from three professional engineers who are subject experts, and following their presentations, we'll open the floor so that you can have some dialogue with them. And the motivation for this panel arises from the Academy's identification of a need to raise the profile of the resources and expertise required to build infrastructure. The Academy has a Future of Engineering Committee, and it is rightly concerned that to meet Canada's green goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions some 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050, our federal government will be initiating hundreds of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure mega projects with inadequate understanding of the requirements to successfully complete them, or even of Canada's capacity to undertake several such projects simultaneously. Now, the Academy is very much aware of the history of failure to deliver infrastructure projects on time, within budget, and with the benefits intended. And it aspires to enhance the likelihood of success of by providing informed advice to government on delivery methodologies that have worked and those that haven't. One of the books that the sources of knowledge that the Academy has is a book entitled How Big Things Get Done by Bent Fleabjerg, a Danish fellow who cites the following statistics based upon his compendium of 16,000 projects undertaken in 106 countries. Only 8.5% of all of them completed on time or within budget, and only 0.5%, half of 1%, actually delivered the benefits that were promised at the outset. So turn that around, over 90% of projects go over budget or beyond time, and 99.5% of them fail to deliver their promised benefits. And even more worrisome is that cost overruns don't form or follow a normal distribution. Many of them have extreme overruns. For example, 18% of IT projects come in at more than 50% over budget. The average overrun is 447%. And even buildings, which we see going up around us in all the cities that we live in, the mean cost overrun on them is 62%. So the troubling reality is that owners and proponents overpromise benefits and underestimate the time and cost to deliver them. So in their zeal to turn visions into reality, they fail to understand the complexities inherent in large-scale projects and launch them before undertaking adequate pre-construction design, planning, and cost analysis. And as Fleabjerg notes, most projects just don't go wrong. They often start wrong. But enough of me, let's get on to our panelists. So today we have three excellent panelists. Leading off will be Dr. Yves Beauchamp, who will present a case study of the nearly $1 billion project that he has underway, and that is the conversion of the former Royal Victoria Hospital into a new pavilion at McGill University. As you saw in the program, Professor Beauchamp is the Vice Principal, Administration and Finance at McGill University, and he was previously with École des Technologies Supérieures, and also was responsible for the development of the new Outremont campus at Université de Montréal. He has received numerous awards and acknowledgements, including being named a member of the Order of Canada. He is a Knight of the National Order of Quebec and a recipient of recognition from the Order of Engineers de Quebec for outstanding achievement in research and teaching. He is a Fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and served as our President from 2020 to 2022. Yves will be followed by Jesse Unke, who is an independent consultant who focuses on leading infrastructure projects and programs. Jesse is a registered professional engineer in Canada and the United States and has several professional designations, including project management professional, Envision sustainability professional, and is certified as a contract-controlled insurance program professional. He has served with several engineering companies and was most recently served as the VP of Canada for the international company COWI. He has experience in many fields of infrastructure, buildings, energy, major bridges, tunnels, marine structures, water and environment, airports, roads, and railways. And he's quite a young guy, actually. You see him here. But he was, but he was named one of 40 under 40 in Canadian construction in 2020. And in 2022, he was named by Engineers Canada as a 30 by 30 EDI champion for leaders in engineering workplaces. He's going to describe to us the complexities in delivering infrastructure projects and I believe marine and tunnel infrastructure and maybe some others as well. But so batting cleanup will be Dr. Thomas Froese, P.Eng, professor and chair of civil engineering at the University of Victoria. And his research interests span a broad range of project and construction management topic areas, including information and computing technologies for construction, sustainability, and innovative teaching practices for engineering education. He has a Ph.D. from one of my alma mater, Stanford University, and he was at the faculty of the University of British Columbia for some 25 years before joining UVic Civil Engineering Department in 2017 as its chair. He is the director of the BC Construction Roundtable and a fellow and division executive member of the Canadian Society of Civil Engineering. Thomas will be speaking on preparing Canada's engineers of tomorrow to manage the major sustainable infrastructure projects that are forthcoming. Now, each of the panelists will speak to us for about 12 to 15 minutes, and we'll save some time at the end for dialogue, open dialogue from all of you. So at this point, I'm going to call upon Yves to start us off. Yves, please.
Alors bonjour et merci d'être venu à cette présentation. So welcome everybody. So thank you for being in that presentation. As we did mention, I will be presenting a case study, which is a project that is on its way right now with a lot of challenge and a complexity. And I think it will be a good case to discuss about project management strategy and how we can control the cost in a volatile market when cost prediction is not an exact science. But anyway, so we'll go through that. So for those who don't know, McGill is in Quebec, in Montreal, but the map that you see right now present in the red area, the footprint of the campus in Montreal downtown. And the gray zone, this is the former Royal Victoria Hospital site. This site has been used for the Royal Hospital for nearly 125 years, and that hospital just moved it not that long ago. This is how did look the hospital 100 years ago. I think this picture is important because what we are trying to achieve right now is to bring back the vision of this hospital as it was 100 years ago in a today standard. So this is how it looks in 2015, and you should know that the hospital moved actually at the Gland site. For those who travel from the airport to downtown, probably you have seen the new hospital that was built in a few years ago, a $2.5 billion mega hospital. So there were two in Montreal, one for the University of Montreal and one from McGill University. So that has created actually a huge infrastructure that was let in the degradation stage for almost 8 years. And the government asked many organizations toward Quebec who would like to take over this project and start doing something. And the only one who raised their hand was University McGill, and you understand why, is because we were very close by. So this is the footprint of the actual hospital. The adjacent building, Hershey, Women and Ross, are not part of that project because those will remain the property of Government of Quebec. And the government is planning now the redevelopment of those buildings. So we expect that this should also bring activity that will be pretty close to what we want to accomplish over there. The goal is to basically demolish the 1950s building, this very high hospital. We did all the study, and it's impossible to reconvert to suit the need of a research center for universities, so we didn't have any choices. It has no patrimonial value. But the green section, this is an heritage value, and we are on the Mount Royal. That's bring a lot of complexity. So the goal of this project is to rehabilitate this heritage building, which will account for 30% of the overall new projects. And at the demolition site, we will be building a new facilities, which will account for 66% of the overall area. So the vision, so I'm not going to go through all those details, but the vision actually, this project is the response of McGill to the climate change. Why? Is because the vision is to bring all the researchers in McGill, from engineering, from geography, from environmental science, chemistry, and also from public policy. All our strength will be concentrated in that building, a building that will be designed to maximize the collaboration between those multidisciplinary, because we believe that the only way that you could tackle the climate change issue is by bringing all those disciplines all together, and the building will be a platform for this to happen. So this is basically the goal. Is going to be 550,000 square feet, because I think a lot of you are still working in feet. I'm better in feet than in meter. And at the end, there will be 2,500 people working there. Most of our professors will be there too. So it's a $870 million project, that the way it was planned. And right now, we're already facing over costs of nearly $100 million. It's about 10%. So I will explain in a few minutes how we will manage so that we believe that we will be able to control the cost. Because we don't want to do some major cut at this point. We already did a lot. Because there's a limit at which you could cut a program, because at the end, the project doesn't make any sense, because overall, you don't achieve the academic vision that was the purpose. So this is the timeline. It took us 5 years to do the planning of this project. So far, we have spent $100 million of design, which is basically the norm, 10 to 15% of a project of that size. Now we have started to launch the construction process. We have decided many years ago to go through a project construction management approach rather than the overall general contractor. Today, I think it was a wise decision. So we brought the project manager, construction manager at 60% design. Now we have reached 100%, and we have decomposed the project in 140 lots. And I will explain to you in a few moments how it's going to work. The construction will be a 60-month construction project, so it should be ready by 2028. So in the market that is quite volatile as today, it's all question of timing, but sometimes we cannot forecast exactly, especially for a project that takes 5 years to design and nearly 5 years to construct. This is some of the architectural designs. So as I mentioned, we will be demolishing the medical M and surgery S building. And on the bottom of the slide, you see the dot line is the actual contour of the actual structure. So you will see that we will bring down as it was many years ago. So now all the belvedere in front of the adjacent building will allow a specific view to the Montreal downtown. And the view that people will have from downtown looking at this project will be the same as it was 100 years ago. So this is an architectural view, a rendu of what would be the project at the end. Could you see now what is more prominent in this project is the heritage building. You don't see that much the new build. The new build is all behind. It has been designed so now it follows the topology of the mountain, which was not the case many years ago. There will be green roof, obviously. And in the front, there will be a fourth court with underneath the classroom, conference room, and access directly to the road. So it's going to be something amazing. But again, you look at the budget not that long ago, $300 million of that budget is for special condition. Usually in a construction project, we're talking about 5%. So that is because it's highly costly when you deal with heritage building, masonry, roof, windows. It's highly costly. And also this site is quite difficult for accessibility during the construction. So that added. And the timing is important because every delay of a month costs right now $3 million. So it has to be on time so that we can eventually deliver. That's another view of this building. So you don't see the 1950 11 stories building anymore. So now it's more like integrated. Again, on the next one, you see some of the entrance. There will be a lot of collaboration space in that building because the goal is to collapse those units and departments and bring the people working according to their skill and projects, so that will, I guess, enhance the serendipity so that people will start working with different discipline. And why public policy? I think this is kind of new because usually you don't see public policy working with engineering, but this is probably the most important when you want to talk about the climate change. Everything starts with public policy. So having those people connected with the scientific engineers and so on, we believe that should be the way to train. Other space that you could see, again, when it will be possible, we will always juxtapose the heritage wall with the new constructions, so that will create, I guess, a wonderful space. Obviously, there will be a lot of wet labs. Chemistry, engineering will be working in that field. So this is the architectural review of where we are right now. So now, what are the challenges? So actually, last year, after we went out from the COVID, well, obviously we were looking at the market and we knew that the interest rates were going up. That turned out to be a good news for us. I will explain, is because there was a lot of residential construction in Montreal during that period. And right now, because of this increase in interest rate, buyers are not so excited as they were. 2 towers in Montreal under construction for condos have stopped it right now, just because there's a lack of buyers. So that gave us kind of a small windows of opportunity, because there's a lot of contractors around that still have some room in their own pipelines. So for us, it's an opportunity. It has to be taken fast. The reason why is because next year in 2024, the government of Quebec will launch major investment plan, because all the projects that were put on hold during the COVID will hit the market. So then everything will happen again as it was. So we have about a 12-month window, and using a project management or construction approach, having 140 lots, what we are planning since last year is to launch as much lot as possible. So now we're planning to launch 60 of the 140 for a total of $531 million. So why? And already I think it works, because we launched the demolition lots a month ago. It was a $30 million estimate, and it went out on market at 15 million, 50% lower than expected. So now you can see some kind of stabilization right now. So we should take, even though we have now an overcost of $90 million, or closely to 100, now instead of cutting again, we will play that during the window, and at the end of the year, we will see where we stand. And after that, for the remaining lots, then we will apply the mitigation that now we are developing using value engineer. And at that time, we will use some control. Maybe the forecourt will be postponed, which would be a 50 million saving. There could be some shelling of floors. We don't know. But those are the things that will be applied when we'll reach there. Difficult to do differently. We could have done a general contractor approach. Maybe we could have launched it a year or two ago, but I'm sure that the cost will be above $1 billion because the contractor would have paid themselves very high because of the risk and so on. So I think this approach at that specific time is good. Maybe it will be different next year. And when we look at the inflation index right now, last year it was 10%. This is where we were hit. So this is when we went up to $100 million more. And the forecast from Quebec, it's 4.5 next year, maybe 2.5 over the next second year. So you see, this is pretty optimistic. So I don't know, we can argue on that. But that's basically what it is forecasted. So we hope that this will hold the role. Because, I mean, we need to have all of those things kind of under control to make sure that we can deliver eventually on time and on budget. The supply chain shortage is still there. The labor shortage is still there. This is also another challenge for infrastructure projects. There's also labor shortage in high and certain trade. For electric, actually, is very high in any project when you go to tender. Mechanics as well. So, but those in our project will come later. So we believe that that time those trade will be at a lower cost. Commodity equipment continue to be high. And such a project in Montreal, there's highly active stakeholders, so I could talk about it. So far, we haven't delayed too much the project. Lately, we had about a month and a half delay for some issues. That cost us about $5 million already. So it's now I think it's ongoing, and I think we should deliver basically on time. So it's pretty short, but it gives you right to the point. The projects give you the challenge and the way we've done that. So I hope that my colleague will be able to link with that and keep going that discussion. So sounds good? Merci.
So I'm hoping just to build off of this presentation and get a little bit of discussion going. So please feel free to stop me at any time and chime in with any questions or comments. But just to build off a little bit of challenges in infrastructure projects, especially when in the project management of them. And I think it's fitting today, being National Indigenous Peoples Day, looking at what does meaningful engagement mean with Indigenous nations. And that's something that I've worked with many nations now over the last couple of years on some of the projects I've worked on, gas lines, water mains, bridges, tunnels, as you spoke about some of the experience I have. And so there's a group called the First Nations Major Projects Coalition that actually integrates into many of the large infrastructure projects. And I would encourage you to take a look at their website, fnmpc.ca, that really outlines who they are, what they do, and how they support projects. And one of the things that people, I think, get wrong when it comes to approaching major, and I'm talking about linear infrastructure projects is my world, not in the building side, but looking at how do you bring First Nations to the table proactively and with meaningful engagement. Because what you'll see with a lot of projects, there's some projects on the mainland where I live that are good examples of this, or maybe bad examples of this, are that Indigenous nations are brought to the table at the 11th hour and said, hey, by the way, we're gonna build this bridge, or by the way, we're gonna put this water main or this gas main in, is that okay? And there's nothing more you can do to get them off your side than approach a project like that. So really what I've been advising clients and the groups that I've had the privilege to work with is to have Indigenous nations at the table right at the beginning and have meaningful engagement, meaningful discussions about what's important for their nations, what's important for their lands. There's some parts of Indigenous lands throughout BC and throughout Canada that are kind of no-go zones, whether they're burial sites or have some kind of cultural significance. So I would say that make sure that you come to the table early with Indigenous nations, have those discussions. And if you're looking to understand more their perspectives on why they have certain stance on certain things, with their lands and with how they approach projects. There's an excellent resource called Indigenous Canada that's put together by the University of Alberta. And I believe it's free right now. I think RBC is sponsoring it, but I would encourage you to have a look at that. Just look that up and Google that. It's very insightful, and any of the folks that I've worked with, staff and teams that I've managed, I've encouraged them to get that training and take a look, because it really explains the cultural significance of why it's important to involve First Nations in projects and have them not only as a stakeholder, but as a partner on projects. Because as you'll see in infrastructure, especially linear infrastructure projects, that project can be stopped dead in the water if you don't have support from Indigenous nations and have an understanding of their stance on a project and what's important in their cultural significance in their lands. The second part I was going to talk about around, again, it's collaboration and stakeholder engagement, is the constructability focus on projects. And that's something that Thomas and I were just chatting before the panel here about. Actually, Thomas and I were on the BC Construction Roundtable together at one point, and I served as president for 3 years. I'm past president this year. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is pull folks together. So pull academic and highly technical folks together with people that really understand how to build the projects, and take a constructability focus on your design. Because what I've seen working with lots of clients over on the mainland, Metro Vancouver, Fortis BC, utility clients like that, is that you'll have a design that's put together, looks great on paper, you get out there, site conditions are never as you thought they were, even if you've done your due diligence in terms of site investigations. And it's something that's solution is made on the fly, which sometimes works but often doesn't. And there's cost implications, schedule implications, scope creep, everything else that comes with that. So that's where I think that the new project delivery models that are out there right now, early contractor involvement, integrated project delivery, are really helping get around that and helping us as an industry come together and put our heads together and not have Mr. Contractor on one side and Mrs. Consultant on the other, but we can sit together in a room and problem solve and take a look and make sure that we're approaching things collaboratively rather than taking a stance and trying to say, oh, this person's just trying to fool us into a change to make money. I've worked closely with contractors, with owners, and with consultants, and everyone's in this, to make some money and as a business, but really no one's out to trick the other person. And I think that that's where we can really start to get some more collaboration. And then to build on that as well, around kind of the collaborative side of things, is one thing that I've seen that's been really effective when you're working on a project, an infrastructure project. Again, I could say a gas line, for example, that goes through multiple municipalities or jurisdictions, is proactively look at putting together a memorandum of understanding with those municipalities. Because if you think you can approach each municipality with the same approach and solution, you're quickly going to find out that that's not the case. And so when I've been working on projects that go across multiple jurisdictions and have a memorandum of understanding put together for each one of those owners, that's really led to project success. Because then you don't run into cases where, again, from a permitting standpoint, you think you've got everything and your permitting and approvals all in place. You go out to start doing the project. Oh, do you have this permit? Do you have this approval? Oh, no, I don't. And then a project is put on hold. And that's embarrassing for the consultant. That's embarrassing for the owner and for the contractor. And quite frankly, it's expensive for the owner as well. So just wanted to give some general comments around what I'm seeing in challenges and what I think are solutions in the infrastructure world and major infrastructure projects. So again, to summarize, that would be meaningful Indigenous engagement. And maybe to touch on that a little bit more, is the Indigenous nations that I've worked with, they're not just looking for you to cut a check and give them money. They're looking for meaningful engagement. And what does that mean? That means, are there opportunities to train inspectors? Are there opportunities to engage an excavating company that may be owned by the nation or something like that, and have that incorporated into your project? And that's where you can really get buy-in from nations that see themselves as partners, not just as a stakeholder and as a box to check when you're getting permits. So again, I'd recommend checking out the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and also the Indigenous Canada course is very eye-opening into why it's important and why it's the right thing to do. Second one being constructability. So again, taking a look at your projects, bringing contractors to the table, and taking a look at the model that fits the project. And what I've seen a lot in the Lower Mainland is owners they're starting to fall out of favor, but design build was a flavor of the day for a long time. And some owners are trying to cram the wrong project with the wrong project delivery model. So I think it's on myself and others that are in the infrastructure advisory space to make sure that the project and the project delivery model match. And I would highly recommend looking at something like an integrated project delivery or early contractor involvement, because I've seen a lot more success with that approach than just a strictly design build, because there's often there's the wrong transfer or ownership of risk, leads to change orders, leads to disputes. There's a couple good examples of projects that have gone really successfully on the Lower Mainland, and some that you can see in the news right now that aren't, due to the project delivery models not matching the project, or not matching the owner's understanding of what that contract is. And that would be another thing to suggest, that make sure that, or I make sure, I can use myself as an example, that when I'm working with an owner, that their team understands how that contract differs from your typical design bid build, and what they can do as an owner, and what they're taking their hands off in terms of control, and passing that over, and also passing that risk over to another party. So short and sweet as well, I just wanted to touch on those three areas, and as well as the memorandum of understanding, I think that I'd touched on, which I've seen a lot of success. And very open to questions or comments, either when we're done, when Thomas is done, or over lunch. Happy to chat a little bit more in detail about some of the problems, solutions, and successes I've seen in projects in the Lower Mainland. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jesse. And so we'll move right along. Thomas, clean up for us here.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. And I was asked to touch on this subject from the perspective of training of project management and engineers. So particularly a little bit from the perspective of how this relates to large infrastructure projects and sustainability in particular. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor of construction management and chair of the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Victoria. I work in areas relating to computing and construction, building information modeling, sustainability. And I've taught construction project management in BC for 30 years now. So I went back in preparation for this and added up a little bit. And I've taught construction management to over 3,000 undergrad students now and 700 grad students. And that makes up a bit more than a third of the current practicing civil engineers in BC. So if we do have a problem with project management in the construction industry, I probably have to take some of the blame for that. Most of the research we do, and quite a bit of the education, is collaborative with practitioners, and that's a bit of a theme I want to explore a bit today. And currently I'm having a bit of fun wearing a different hat, being a client of a couple major construction projects. We're building 2 new buildings for the civil engineering building at UVic. So I'll start with giving just a quick impression of what project management and engineering education looks like in Canadian engineering programs these days. And I'll use our program at the University of Victoria to illustrate this. And I'll use 4 main strategic themes that we work with in our department. So the first one is that we call civil engineering the technology that builds society. This is mainly how we introduce what civil engineering is all about to incoming and prospective students. It's the part that's probably most familiar with anyone that's ever studied civil engineering in the past. There's a lot of stuff here that hasn't changed in a long time, some new technology as well. But our second theme is green civil engineering. And the civil engineering program at UVic was started fairly recently with the goal of trying to be the greenest civil engineering program in Canada. So it really does try to take to heart the big challenge of transforming the whole building and infrastructure industry from one that's a major contributor to greenhouse gases to one that's a major part of the solution. So we do embed sustainability throughout much of our program of engineering. Our third is that civil is engineering for and with people. And I'm sure I don't have to convince anybody in this room that engineering for big projects really is a people business, but a lot of prospective students don't really think of engineering that way. So we try to get that message across, and we do try to include a lot of that in the programming as well. So a lot of equity, a lot of decolonization, a lot of environmental justice topics throughout the program. And our final theme is about learning. We're calling learning with heads, hands, and hearts. And that is, we do try to up our game in terms of the pedagogy of how people learn. That leads us to a lot of active learning, a lot of hands-on, a lot of group discussion work, a lot of lab work, a lot of co-ops, as well as a lot of trying to address the motivation of why students are learning the topics that they are learning. So those are the big themes that shape our undergraduate engineering programs. And in terms of project management in particular, what does that look like? Well, we'd be introducing students to what construction projects look like, the role of planning. They'd be learning about scheduling, estimating, project delivery, site safety, sort of the traditional core project management topics. They'd get brief introductions to things like quality, risk, equity, sustainability in the construction industry. And they'd be seeing project management at a number of different points throughout a program. They'd be introduced to it in first-year design projects. They'd likely have a core course in construction or project management. They're responsible for good project management practices in fourth-year capstone projects. And they might well have several elective courses that go into a bit more advanced project management ideas. There's also graduate programs, and there's probably at least 10, maybe up towards 20 graduate programs in construction and project management in Canada. I won't read the list of topics there, but you'll see some are these kind of core project management ideas that are going into in more depth. Some are more intermediate, or some are quite advanced, simulation, advanced modeling of risk and uncertainty, and financial modeling of projects. A lot of advanced AI, computing, including machine learning and building information modeling, and advanced computing topics, labor and industrial relations, and quite a few topics there. Each topic there is more or less a full course in a grad program, in a Canadian program. So there's really quite a lot of depth in advanced project management topics in these grad programs. Okay, so with that as a quick snapshot of what the programs look like, and thinking about what does this have to do with large infrastructure projects, it made me think of one way I think of project management knowledge, or what kind of knowledge and skills does it take for someone to be a proficient expert engineer or project manager. And you can think of two different kinds of knowledge, and one is knowledge that's it's easier to learn it in the classroom. You can learn it in practice, but it's probably easier to learn it in the classroom. And other knowledge, it's easier to learn it in practice. You can learn it in a classroom, but that's hard. So the reason I think of it this way sometimes is we do things explicitly to try and get some of that easier to learn in practice knowledge into the programs, into the classrooms. So students have that context when they're learning the topics and when they're graduating. And we do that with things like co-op placements, guest speakers, courses that focus on field studies and case studies. So we try to include some of that in the programs. But to develop that idea a little bit more, and I'm hesitant to add labels to these two ideas, at the risk of offending somebody, but so I'll call one the theory-based knowledge. Theory can be a bit of a dirty word sometimes in the construction industry, but I'll go with that. And the other one, experience-based knowledge. So the theory-based knowledge tends to be more formal, more codified type of knowledge. Focuses more on a clear understanding of these basic concepts, can get into more depth and advanced techniques. Whereas the experienced knowledge is more tacit knowledge. People can have very high proficiency and skills at something without necessarily being able to describe exactly what it is they know or how they know it. Focus more on the application of the ideas, focus more on wide breadth and really deep competency of the techniques. So if you think of these as two dimensions, you can kind of think of different groups of people within the industry, you might say. So if we have the theory-based knowledge, kind of going from core project management techniques to more advanced techniques, and then you have the experience-based knowledge from less experience, less proficiency to very high proficiency. So first we have the students, the undergrad students. They know a bit about the core techniques. They don't have much experience, much proficiency. The grad students are likely to have a little bit more experience, but they have quite a bit more advanced technique knowledge. My experience with practitioners in the industry, by and large, has been, I think they're very good at project management. They tend to be very good at sort of core project management principles. There are a lot of more advanced techniques we'll work with in grad programs that we don't see used that often in industry. So you might say practitioners have somewhat more techniques than undergrad students, much more proficiency. One place we tend to see a bit more advanced techniques is large multinationals. Although when they come in and work on projects, often they don't have as much of the locally relevant expertise and experience. And the one other group I'd put on there is often there's part of the project teams are people that are not construction or design professionals, but they're sort of adjacent clients, finance people or so on, and often they seem to have a relatively lack of understanding of core project management practices. So I'll come back to that picture in a moment, and I'll finally just move on to the idea of this project management challenges that large infrastructure projects face. So, and particularly driven by climate change and sustainability. So we do have this drastic need to decarbonize. In general, this tends to lead to a reduction of consumption, reduced consumption, but it does lead to a substantial need for a lot of new construction. So we need major projects to develop clean energy generation capacity, to rebuild energy grids and storage solutions, to retrofit all our building stocks that's so low performance, to provide the transportation infrastructure and manufacturing capability, to decarbonize the transportation sector, for carbon capture and storage, and buildings and infrastructure to help mitigate things like sea level rise and global warming. So there really is a very high demand for a large number of large projects to address climate change. And so, as we heard in the introduction, there are a lot of challenges with large projects, and I won't get into any detail on this, but we do need to be able to find ways of building faster and cheaper. I won't get into that aspect, but that's a big focus of a lot of innovation, research and development. We need to be able to manage the projects better, and that's things like better project delivery models and so on. And we also need to be able to do a much better job of predicting what the outcomes will be. And we've heard about that as well. So there's this strong optimism bias. And as we said, this isn't a normal distribution. The more size and complexity projects are, the more sort of exponential growth there is for worse than expected outcomes. So big problems and a wide range of solutions. But in general, the solutions almost necessarily will include more planning, better communications, better coordination, better control, better treatment of uncertainty and risks, and better management tools and techniques. So in general, coming back to this picture, at the highest level, we can say we need more. We need better project management along both of those dimensions. And so if we look at those different groups, the students need more experience. They need to transition into the industry and gain that experience-based knowledge quickly and effectively. Practitioners need more experience with these large infrastructure projects, and there's room for better techniques, better technologies. Large multinationals need more collaboration for local experience and those adjacent sectors need more awareness of PM practices. And if you look at a lot of these areas we need more of, they really do they really rely on more collaboration between practice and training. And so that's kind of the final idea that I'll end with, is that I think a lot of the things that we need more of to do better on these large projects, one aspect of them is more and better collaboration between the practice of project management and the training and education of project management. So I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Yves and Jesse and Thomas. Very interesting presentations. I note we have about 10 minutes before lunch, and hands are going up all over. So this is your opportunity to raise questions with the panel. And Karen, you had your hand up, I think. Oh,
Okay.
Go ahead, Ken. You've got the mic.
Yeah. This is for Thomas. I recall a senior vice president of Shell saying, we're quite good at doing projects on time and on budget, big projects, but the problem is we build the wrong projects. So it's also my observation that you didn't put enough time on what we call DBM, design basis memorandum. Doing the front end, spending more time on the front end, really prescribing what the project is, what its intent is. How will you judge success and who gets to vote whether you had success or not? And also, when the design is put together, minimizing changes, because the cost overruns are usually because the DBM at the front end wasn't specific enough, and then there's multiple changes, and freezing changes is critical to maintaining cost control.
Yeah, I'd say it's hard to, we don't have time to get into details, and it's hard to deal with it at too high a level. But I would say, big picture, there is this strong optimism bias. That's not any great insight. That's just kind of putting a different label on this problem that projects tend to go over cost and over budget. And in general, two big ways we can address that is more planning, which I think is a version of what you were describing there. So putting more effort up front into doing all the thinking through, you know, as objectively as possible and as much detail as possible, what will be the costs and implications. And also better treatment of all those uncertainties and risks, which we really don't know in advance. All of the planning and estimating is always a guess about the future. The only thing you know for certain is that it's going to be wrong. You don't know how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, but you can do a good job or a bad job of working with that uncertainty.
Risk management.
Yep.
Thank you, Ken. Karen.
Thank you. This is mostly also for Thomas. Just a couple points. I'm just wondering if in your program that you look at, you know, income statements and balance sheets, because I would think that that would be where it should be taught. And if it's not an outcome of an undergraduate education, that's a travesty. And then the other thing you mentioned, that communication is an issue. And I must have said, I don't know, somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 times that we should have minors in psychology. We need all of these project, management and construction management is ultimately it's people management, and we don't have those skills. And I would suggest that you create a new best practice by bringing in some of your colleagues in that department. And certainly we already know that people that have a higher IQ are better at this type of work. And so we need to, empathy can be learned. It's a skill. So I really do encourage you to take that piece of advice. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think we don't do a good job of those subjects in the undergrad program. We do touch on them, but really not nearly enough. We have at UVic, we have a minor in the engineering program in business, and it's not well subscribed at all. The students aren't showing much interest in it, which I think is a really sad outcome. I would say we do get into quite a lot of pretty good coverage of both of the areas you talked about in the grad programs. But again, that's not a high number of students relative to the number of practitioners.
I see, Axel, you have your hand up. There's a question in the far corner.
Yeah, so Janakar Vanpura, I'm also, my discipline is with Thomas. We are in the same community on the construction engineering and management. By looking at some of the comments came from the speakers and also from the audience, I think the key is you can also talk about cost overruns if they reduce the scope of work. Sometimes they said, oh, we made the time and the cost, but if you really look at the original scope and the scope that they completed, they're very different. So the way that you measure cost overruns is very different, in terms of, some of the publications that we have produced. But one of the fundamental problems that we have in Canada with the undergraduate education specifically on construction engineering and management, where we have maybe 2 courses, maybe 3 courses in our civil engineering program. We barely touch the topics. Karen, I fully get to your point about some of the financial management side of things, which is like being barely touched on that. But if you look at the South, in the United States, there are many construction engineering, Bachelor of Science programs in top universities. I'll give you 5 different ones regionally. Stanford, Texas A&M, Arizona State, Georgia Tech. I mean, you can have so many different places. In Canada, unfortunately, our civil engineering community is not very much happy to have another program called construction engineering. So the undergraduate programs on construction management are at polytechnics. So they are at BCIT, at SAIT, NAIT, and few actually in Ontario as well. I think for us to really be bringing graduates, specifically they get that talent and skills to build at the undergraduate level, is having a comprehensive undergraduate programs that would bring them up to speed so that they will have the skill set that they develop. Of course, they get that skill set at the graduate level through various graduate programs that Thomas mentioned, but there is a huge gap that we have, which is a big problem that in Canada compared to particularly with the United States. Just a comment on that.
Yeah, if I may answer to this, I would invite you to look at the curriculum of the construction engineering program at ETS. That program has been run for almost 20 years, and it's not based on civil engineering, it's based on project management. They teach BIM and everything you need to know about. So those guys or girls that went out from those programs, usually they are hired by a major contractor doing project management of large-scale projects. So I invite you to look at the curriculum of this program. So, and also they offer a master in Ph.D. and also construction management, but it's in French, so that's probably why it's not well known. So it's a small detail.
So we're going to take 2 more questions, I think, and then this gentleman, and then Axel will come to you next. And Guy, if there's time, we'll come to you.
Okay, I'm Josie with the TC Energy, and we're obviously in the business of building infrastructure, energy infrastructure, particularly pipelines. So Jesse, this is probably more for you there. 10 years ago, when we started the Coastal GasLink project, I was the project director at the time, so we have a budget of $6 billion. Today, you're looking at that is more than double of that. So it's a tremendous increase. Obviously, this is not going to be a project in the 10%, definitely in the 90% there. I want to comment particularly on the indigenous engagement as you talked about. This, we found in a tremendous lesson learned for those mega project, the linear infrastructure project across the very long route. We had a 20+ indigenous community, First Nation community to consult with, and that given the regulatory permitting process, it's a mandatory consultant and process. That's a very complex, undefined, unclear, lack of a framework, so you kind of make it as you go kind of thing. what we found is that the engagement based on building capacity, designated contracting, all those things you mentioned is not quite enough. Our First Nation, our indigenous community looking for more. They have high expectations than those things because we've been doing this for decades and that we found ourselves not being enough. The trend we're seeing here is, one is we need to build long-term relationship. It's not like when you have a project and you come to the nation to say, hey, can I get you support with a little bit of money here, or we have give you a contract. That often is not enough. It's too late and not being viewed as a sustainable relationship. When you finish the project, you go and there's nothing left there. So that's one of the trends we're observing there. The second is they're expecting to have a equity position in those projects such that they have sustainable revenues or earnings coming to the community. So it's actually built for the long-term prosperity for the community. So I just want comment on that, and I want to get your response, or maybe comment if you've seen the similar kind of things.
Yeah, no, that's, thank you for the comments. I totally agree, and I would say, maybe I should clarify a little bit around when I say meaningful engagement. I totally agree with you, is that it's not transactional. It's something where you want to build that relationship, and I've seen with projects that cross multiple nations, or if you know that you're doing a pipeline or whatever that piece of infrastructure looks like, to proactively build those relationships. And you're right, it's not like walking into a corporate office and shake hands and sign on the dotted line. Nations want you to understand what's important to them. Again, like I touched on, what areas within their nation are off limits, what's important to them, and also, like you said, not just writing a check and walking away, but providing those opportunities to help build the nation and help build the expertise within their nation. So if there's opportunities to train folks as like I mentioned, inspectors, or get them offer scholarships, or whatever that looks like to get more Indigenous folks into technical programs like Thomas, that's going to go a long way. So I totally agree with you that it is something you want to be proactive about, getting in front of those nations proactively. If you know that your project or projects are going to be crossing multiple nations over an extended period of time, get out there and get to know the nation. And also, I think a lot of clients that I've worked with have their own internal Indigenous engagement and outreach folks, that it's not just something that's done on the side of the desk of a project manager. There's somebody that's assigned to do that and to make sure that that's a positive, fruitful relationship. So I totally agree with you, and I guess the summary of all that is it's not transactional. You want to make sure you build that trust and that solid foundation, because when their phone rings and it's you calling, and if they think you're just, oh, he's just coming to do something and take off again, they're not going to answer your call, right? So, good point.
Okay, Axel, we'll have a cleanup from you as the chair of the Future of Engineering Committee. So
Well, I'm tackling a difficult issue. I'm directing it to you, Yves. First of all, thank you for a very lucid presentation of the project. I noticed that the initial phase was about 5 years or thereabouts. Can you comment on what you did with respect to stakeholder engagement, and then bringing those engagements to a conclusion that seemed to be satisfactory? I think it would be worthwhile to focus some emphasis on that. Thank you.
Yeah, there were many stakeholders in the project, as you can imagine. And being on the mountain, it did increase because there were a community called des Amis de la Montagne. There were also Héritage Montréal. There were also a group of citizens that called them the Patriot, and they don't want this to be transferred to an Anglophone university. You can imagine everything we had. So we had to engage, obviously, discussion. And one of the way we solved that issue, because there was a lot of noise regarding the fact that this site will be transferred to a university. I remind you, we were the only one who raised our hand when the government asked us who want to take care of that, but people tend to forget. And instead of becoming the owner, we have accepted to be a leaseback for 100 years. So for the 100 years, we will be developing the site. We will act as owner of the site. And in 100 years from now, obviously that will be renewed. But that was a way that we solve that issue so that the people will understand that the government or the community will remain owner of the land. There were also some issue with the indigenous community. We did engage very hardly with them right from the beginning, and from the Mohawk community, it went very well. We were able to integrate many architectural, meaningful things in the project so that the sense of belonging will be very high for them. But from our blind sight, we never saw that coming 6 months ago. A small community, a group of 6 women called themselves the Mohawk Mother, claimed that there were some unmarked grave on that site. So you can imagine that we took this very seriously. So we did engage a very emotional discussion with them. After many weeks, we were able to come up with some kind of real agreement so that how we're going to proceed from a archaeological point of view to make sure that we respect their tradition and respect also the fact that there might be an unmarked grave over there. So now things are moving. We haven't found anything almost yet. Because you should understand that site has been renewed many times. There's been parking, a lot of infrastructure for many, many years. So the chance of finding something, it's very low, but it's there. So you have to take care of that. So I think you should always engage discussion, try to find solution, and take always very seriously those claims, because it's very easy to say, well, no, it's not true, it's impossible, and I think we should not have this approach. It has to be based on discussion. So those are the main, but even our students also were part of the stakeholder that did oppose for whatever reason, but they always oppose anyway on anything that we're doing. This is normal. This is part of the training, actually. And, but again, the communication engagement, town halls, discussion, always bring the purpose of the projects. That was basically the way to go. Okay?
That's an excellent question, and just on that point, I would mention that when we did the wastewater treatment project here in Victoria, we knew that the pipeline would be going through a sensitive area where there was likely to be indigenous remains. And early on, we sat with the First Nations and negotiated a protocol agreement that if any remains were found, we had already agreed in advance that A, we would have their archaeological people on the project throughout, but B, there was an agreement about how those remains would be transferred and reinterred. And so it was understood that there would be a disruption to construction while that happened, but it wouldn't stop construction. Yeah. And so it was very important to have that early engagement and understanding.
Yeah, but in that case, the reason why they believe or they claim there might be some unmarked grave, it's based on the, there is an Allen Memorial, Psychiatric Institute on the site, and it's based on a witness that is 85 years old right now that remember when she was in that institute in 1960 or that she saw during the night people taking children and burying the children on the land, which is very unusual in a hospital. You don't do that, but based on that, that's where it started. So, but as I mentioned, it was quite emotional, but at the end, with dialogue, with compassion, I think we were able to come up with some kind of agreement, which is kind of fragile because it's we never know what we're going to find. But so far, I think it's going well.
So I'm very conscious of the time. We have to allow you to have lunch and allow the 1 o'clock panel to start roughly on time. So we're going to need to conclude, and obviously we've only barely scratched the surface, and we haven't even addressed the whole issue in Canada of the environmental review process that takes years and years and years, and what impact, what we're going to do about that so that we do a proper environmental review, but also allow all these projects we're talking about to get underway. So a lot of difficulties. But the 3 panelists would be more than happy to engage with you over lunch and take your further questions. Sorry, Guy, that we had to cut you off. But put your hands together and thank Yves and Jesse and Thomas for their presentation. And Robert, unless you have words, I think we're adjourned for lunch. But, thank you.